South Africa's Just Energy Transition Program, whilst it's led by government, the position of business, labor, civil society are recognized as critical partners in ensuring that transition is just, equitable, and that it aligns to economic growth, job creation, and protects livelihood. OSF's climate work focuses on supporting the delivery of the net zero economy. And I'm hoping that through our ability to talk to you at an individual basis, to talk to you collectively as a group, to continuously make sure that we keep the conversation going, that we are able to get to the realization of a future that will not leave a damaged climate for generations to come, but rather that will lead a really robust climate that is able to sustain itself as we go forward.
We need to do really the right thing, but also the right way, and make sure that we don't repeat some of the transitions that have been made in the past. It's really going to help us look at all those pledges and to provide space to look at the best practices, and also looking into how to overcome the barriers to get to where we need to be, because we're still far from where we need to be. And therefore, because of this process, I think it gives us an opportunity to build, from the experiences that we will also have in South Africa, and to see how to replicate, the good practices, what we learn from making such a mobilization happen, but acknowledging the fragility of it and how to enhance if we want to scale it up. And to have these just transitions in South Africa as a model for the rest of the continent and even beyond the continent.
We all know that as things stand,
in the next few years until 2030, we'll be decommissioning about 11,000 megawatts of coal-fired power stations, and we need to replace those.
We do need a big mover, a substantial player to catalyze other climate action and other sources of finance. And we're thinking that Eskom is that big mover to facilitate a more orderly transition, and one that can most likely facilitate systems change. So the 8.5 billion at COP needs to be shaped into a deal, and it appears that the utility is not at the negotiating table, or maybe not yet at the negotiating table. And I think while South African diplomats have done a good job to elicit an initial pledge, I think Eskom, within its set of coherent skills and knowledges, has something to add in how we express our vision and our agency, most especially for how this deal comes together.
We've got a budget speech today, all of us are praying, because we're not sure about the planning system. Will the minister speak about climate finance, or will he speak about 350 rand social grants? Because we've not yet understood the integrated planning of that the budget can speak about energy, the grants, jobs, etc. The reason we are going into this process is because we've got market risks and opportunities, and we must underline opportunities, because there's nothing to showcase. So there's quite a value chain in those sectors. And I just thought that we should give him a picture of where the coal mining and some of the resources are. And you can see Mpumalanga.
We are moving to this disruptive technology that is renewable energy that is coming in. And at the same time, economic diversification is quite limited. We don't have that. And at the same time, people were complaining mostly with the equality in Mpumalanga. We are trying to make a better life for the community. At the end of the day, is it going to create jobs that are sustainable that we are talking about right now? Or is it going to still leave the community so poor and vulnerable to everything that is happening? What we are saying that let us come together. Yeah. Government, we are not here to fight with you. We didn't design this structure of national, provincial, district, local, but it was designed by a relevant person to say, let us work together, come together, to say, how can we better the life of our communities?
So the need for collaboration, the need for working together based on that vision that the Commission is working on would be very useful. And then resourcing it, because if we don't have the resources to do the work, we're going to find ourselves sitting in this room and saying the same thing.
So we sit with a climate crisis. Within that climate crisis, in South Africa certainly, but around the world, it is driven in large part by the dynamics that have evolved within the energy sector, the way that resources are extracted, the way that we produce and use energy is driving this climate crisis. And that energy crisis is a governance crisis. It is fundamentally the rules of the game that determine what happens in the energy sector, who gets to participate in what happens, who suffers and carries the social, ecological externalities from that sector, and who has historically and who will in future benefit from that sector. Those rules are warped. They are broken. This front line of government is in crisis.
We have a plan as a country, the integrated resource plan. We need to implement the integrated resource plan. And when you implement the plan and you don't divert to things such as your power ships, where we're not going to do industrialization, then you become focused. You take advantage of opportunities. We lost opportunities in the past because the renewable energy industry was starting to pick up in terms of industrialization, technology localization and industrialization. China, for instance, they are way far ahead because of technology localization and industrialization, and they take their technologies very far. I can talk the whole day about the bottlenecks that we have in the country in terms of our own technologies. You develop a technology in South Africa, it goes and changes the world from elsewhere. And then you go there and then you get it at a very high cost. Elon Musk, so many other people, the lithium-ion battery technology was developed in South Africa. Where are we getting it from now? We're importing it from elsewhere. How many jobs have been created in the United States because of lithium-ion battery that was developed in South Africa?
I think it's a question about agency, that we have not protected our own sources of skills, wealth, research, development, but handed them over all too easily. And we haven't looked after the ways in which we can harness all of those things. So for me, it's a question of agency and also of allyship, how to create those relationships across governance structures.
In the developing countries of the world amounted to no more than 80 billion. The Presidential Climate Finance Task Team is not part of the Presidential Climate Commission. The Presidential Climate Commission, as people will know, is an independent body set up by the President, made up of various stakeholders who make up the commissioner body of the PCC. And in addition to that, are ministers of the key departments that are part of, or essential part of, either policy or the implementation that is required as we undertake our decarbonization pathway. The $8.5 billion, I need to say at the outset, is not enough to undertake the transition that we need to undertake over the next 30 to 40 years. In fact, we would say it is not even enough to undertake the early stages of transition that we need to undertake over the next 10 years or so to 2030. Having said that, it is a start, and subject, of course, to a number of conditionalities. I think the country welcomes a transaction of this kind if it materializes for a couple of reasons. Number one, it speaks to and, in fact, has at its heart an essential component of not only industrial transformation for the South African economy as we decarbonize, but as the PCC we will ensure and have ensured that it is embedded with the notion of a just transition.
Because the climate crisis and the economic crisis are intrinsically intertwined, the issue on the imbalances that persist between the skills offered in our country and the skills that are needed for the green transition is one that will affect the young people the most in South Africa. While there's growing evidence, not just done in the country alone, but across the globe, that for net gains resulting from the climate action and even the just transition itself, the 2018 International Labour Organization report predicted that fossil fuel dependent sectors and countries and regions will experience job displacement. And this is obviously an issue in South Africa. And if we can recall accurately, President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address earlier this month focused quite intensively and quite a lot on job creation.
It's important that the South African position around what we take to CSW as a country is also includes these issues around the climate crisis and how it directly impacts on women.
To the fringes of our society, working in roles that are supportive as opposed to those that are in leadership. So according to the OECD, women across the world spend up to 10 times more on unpaid care work than men. And as a result, women tend to be one of the poorest groups in our societies. Furthermore, a UN study revealed that the gap in poverty rates by sex are widest for women and men aged 25 and 34. So this is now also including your youth group. And they are also likely to have children. And the same study also disclosed that living with children is associated with higher rates of poverty for adults, so that's for both men and women. But because of the pressures in the home front, including taking care of dependents, women tend to have higher poverty rates than men. I think Lauren was the one who did say that I think the crisis, or any sort of type of crisis, helps to reveal the fault lines that we currently have in our existing society. The financing that has been given to this climate finance deal should be somehow include women as part of that vulnerable group. And would certainly like to hear where women fall into this, into the plans.
And I think what brings us together is an understanding that, climate justice is not just this isolated niche issue that can be dealt with by itself, but rather that our struggles are really interconnected, and the transformation that's needed to address climate justice and the climate crisis is one that must take into account all these interconnected inequalities and injustices, so that we are using the crisis of climate change as part of the vehicle for a much deeper and broader transformation. It's clear that the rich global north, who has predominantly been the ones that have contributed to climate change, the pollution, they are the ones that are most responsible for this crisis and owe a climate debt and climate reparations to the global south, which is typically poorer, less well off, less responsible for driving the climate crisis. Now, that's relatively easy at the level of generalizations, but South Africa is quite complicated because we kind of fall in the middle of that. We are global south in some ways, but we also have global north within us, right? The minerals energy complex that sort of underpins South Africa's economy was forged in the coal-powered fires of apartheid, and it's made us one of the most unequal and polluting countries in the world. And as a result, we have an elite few that have really benefited from this exploitation, both of people and of the planet, right? And so we do have our own global north here in South Africa, right? And so when we try to go onto the international stage and say South Africa is owed a climate debt, I think we must not forget about that polluting wealthy elite in South Africa and the debt that they owe too. The heart of the struggle for a just transition is a struggle for more representative democracy, is a struggle for us to be able to hold our leadership accountable and not to be threatened in response. And so I think we've got a lot of work to do as part of this just transition is to reclaim those levers of democracy and to reclaim in climate finance our ability to be participating in how those budgets are created, in who benefits from the projects, and in the end, what vision that climate finance is being used towards.
We are quite adamant that there needs to be transparency in the process leading up to a determination of what the initial $8.5 billion would be spent on. Of course, as it relates to actually who's in the room to structure and negotiate the deals, etc., we can't have public participation. In fact, we might not even, as the PCC, have a place in that room, because in the end, it's going to be contractual in nature. And of course, the final question that is going to arise, and I want to say this, is in totality, what is the cost of this offered $8.5 billion? And if it is even 1 basis point higher than what the National Treasury could, of its own bat, raise in the market, the questions going to arise: do we really want this type of quality and quantum of resource? And those are all questions that remain to be answered by the Presidential Climate Finance Task Force.
I'd like to thank Alex for raising the challenges that protesters and campaigners working on climate justice increasingly face, the threats, the smear campaigns, and often outright attacks, criminalization, jail. And my own sense is that not just here in South Africa, but across the world, I think these threats are going to increase as we get closer to a point where people, communities start demanding for action. And I think there are powerful interests, both political interests, I think that's been discussed here clearly, but also corporate interests.